You're on CYInterview.
I'm Christian Nick. Today on CYInterview, we welcome filmmaker Ben Proudfoot. He has been nominated for an Oscar at this month's Academy Awards for A Concerto as a Conversation in the documentary short film category. Ben, thanks for being on CYInterview. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Very interesting 13-minute piece. So you and your co-director, fellow nominee, and someone who stars in this short documentary, Chris Bowers, is an accomplished composer. He wrote the score for the 2018 Oscar Best Picture Green Book and has a long resume of accomplishments. How did you guys come together to tell the story of him and his grandfather, Horace, who left the South in the 1940s during Jim Crow for Los Angeles, California, and becomes then an accomplished businessman in the dry cleaning industry?
Well, Chris and I have been friends for a number of years, and we have never collaborated before. And just been friends for about 5 or 6 years. We were introduced by a mutual friend, Peter Rotter. And I was working on a project for the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and we were trying to find stories that were at the intersection of music and Los Angeles. And I was kind of flipping through the season, and I saw that Chris had an original concerto that had been commissioned by the American Youth Symphony that was premiering in February, and this was like October, November 2019. And I called Chris, and I said, Chris, have you written the concerto yet? And he said, no. And I said, well, what if I make a film about you writing this concerto? Because there's kind of this long dialogue between film composers writing film music and film composers writing concert music, and that whole dialogue between the two. And so I thought it would be an interesting film. And when I got there, Chris was all dressed up. We're getting together for sort of a breakfast meeting and to discuss the project. And he was all dressed up, having just come from a dedication ceremony for his 91-year-old grandfather. The city had named an entire block, the Bowers Retail Square, on Central Avenue in South LA. And he told me the story of how his grandfather came from this tiny town of Bascom, Florida, and left when he was 17 years old and hitchhiked across the country and just by serendipity landed in Los Angeles. And I said, that's a much better story. So we wove the two together and locked eyes and became partners in crime.
What I take away from this project is how family can impact future generations, and because of what Chris's grandfather did, it helps his grandson get the best opportunities to learn music growing up, and thus he is now one of America's biggest stars in the composing world. Was that not one of the main messages you were trying to accomplish with the project?
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, I think we wanted to make a film that was a dedication to a story that, Horace, Chris's grandfather, is part of the silent generation, right? And I don't think Horace ever thought that his sacrifices would be recognized at this scale with an Oscar nomination, with hundreds of thousands of people watching his story. And we wanted to just shed light on the sacrifices that he made that made Chris's career possible today. We wanted to track the history from slavery to the Walt Disney Concert Hall.
How did he feel about your guys' final product when it was completed?
Apparently he got quite emotional, and Chris said it was the first time he had ever seen his grandfather get emotional. And so, as a filmmaker, that's everything. This project has been such an incredible journey because in many ways it's me helping my friend make a tribute to his grandfather. And that it has come to this level of recognition that the tribute has soared so high is just, I don't think Horace, you can imagine, right? He's 92 years old. He's lived, a huge life. And so at this point in his life to be recognized at this scale, I think it's just like such an incredible deluge of flowers and fireworks that I don't think he expected.
Do you think this project with your friend Chris has made him feel more proud of who he is today as a composer and more confident in who he is because of what his grandfather went through?
I think you'd have to ask Chris, but I think I know I've heard Chris say that the conversation, not necessarily the film or the outcome of the film, but the actual conversation that he had that we recorded that turned into the film was an important conversation with his grandfather for him and his career and his motivation. I think like any young, emerging artist, we all have doubts and questions, and we're trying to figure out who we are and what our place is. And I think Chris has found a lot of wisdom and direction from talking to his grandfather, and has said as much. So yeah, I think he's very proud, and I know that his family is very proud of him.
Well, I think also in A Concerto as a conversation, I think we're also learning that no adversity is too big to overcome, but sometimes you have to go somewhere else to get over it, right?
Well, I think, obviously that was Horace's first step, was to just get out of that part of the country that just was so entrenched with racism. But, I mean, as we find out in the story, in some ways it was no different in Los Angeles. As he says in the film, in the South they tell you, in Los Angeles they show you. And he was forced to use several ingenious methods of to become an entrepreneur in Los Angeles, to borrow money, etc., because he was facing similar bigotry on the other side of the country. But I think what Horace sort of comes back to over and over again is a persistence, a stubbornness in the face of adversity. He tells Chris in the film, just remember, you cannot stop me. And I don't think I've ever, I've made hundreds of short documentaries, I've interviewed hundreds of people. I think that's the high watermark in terms of conviction, from someone who's lived 92 years. He says that with such conviction, you cannot stop me. And whatever that spirit of conviction is that Mr. Bowers had in that moment has been guiding this film, and it has kept going and going, and for that I'm very grateful.
So tell me about your life as a filmmaker, and what you hope to accomplish, and what's ahead for you.
Yeah, so I'm just at the beginning of my career. I'm 30. I've been making short documentaries for about 10 years. I started a company called Breakwater Studios, which produced this film. And, I have fallen in love with the short documentary format. I think it's hugely undervalued, criminally undervalued, as a student format or as a stepping stone or proof of concept format, but I think it's a beautiful and elegant way to tell stories. It also has the lowest barrier of entry of all of the formats. You don't need millions of dollars to make a short documentary. And so I'm kind of, on one hand, building a company around short documentaries that has all the creative departments under one roof, that is a renaissance of the old studio model. That's sort of scratching my entrepreneurship need. And then on the filmmaker side, I'm doing my best to try to bring stories to the screen and facilitate people who have stories to tell that bring context and kind of fill in some of the elisions of history, things and as Errol Morris would say, the basement windows into history, ways that we can understand where we are and where we have been through firsthand accounts and personal narrative with the highest craft of cinema. That's what I'm obsessed with at the moment.
You can watch A Concerto as a conversation on YouTube and a variety of other platforms as we head to the Academy Awards later this month. Ben Proudfoot, thanks so much for being with us on CYInterview. In closing, what would it feel like to win?
It would feel great. My dad passed away last year in May, and I would be thinking of him, and I would be thinking of Chris and his grandfather, and just knowing that their story touched the Academy in that way would mean the world. It would be a beautiful moment, but whatever the case may be, it's already been an incredibly satisfying and thrilling experience.
Ben Proudfoot, filmmaker, nominated in the documentary short film category for A Concerto is a Conversation. Thanks so much for being with us on CYInterview, and please hang on with me.
Thank you.